and welcome to our webinar for combining ISO 9001, 14001, and 45001 programs. My name is Brian Kellerman. I am the Chief Quality and Safety Officer for Kellerman Consulting. We do webinars like this on a regular basis, about every other month. The topics alternate between, sometimes they're specialized in food and other times they're specialized in ISO and non-food businesses. This webinar obviously is centered on ISO or ISO principles pertaining to three specialized books. Um, for those of you joining us, whether you're new to ISO or ISO, or if you've been doing this for a long time, our hope is that you're going to get a lot of good information out of this. But this particular webinar is going to be a little more on the advanced side. We're going to have maybe intermediate to advanced. We've done webinars in the past about the basics of starting up ISO 9001 programs for small businesses. We also have a series of videos on our website that address a lot of the basics of the things that we're talking about. So you'll notice that we're going to not delve too deeply into some of the topics of ISO, but what we are going to look at today are the crucial elements for businesses that have selected to do more than one program at the same time. ISO or ISO, again, is an international standard of businesses. And because you can select different books, they can be merged together into single programs managed by the same people or separate people within an organization. So when we start to look at what these programs are and how they fit together, we're going to focus on the areas that we think are of most importance to getting that correct. We'll touch on the basics of all of those programs briefly, but we are going to focus on the five main areas that we think are crucial to getting that right. Before I jump into the specifics and we get into these topics, I do want to point out there is a chat function here to the right. Phoebe has already put a chat message up. The thing that I love about webinars is the opportunity to be able to answer questions as the webinar is happening. So if you're watching this and you want to ask any specific questions, please feel free. You'll notice that I kind of will notice it, finish my thought, and then address it as quickly as possible. But I love to be able to answer questions as they come up. It personalizes it, and a lot of times it brings out really great interactions. So with that said, we have when we talk about 9001, 14001, and 45001, those are the most common ISO programs that we personally, as a business, interact with. Our clients generally are asking for those more than any other. There are about, I want to say 7 or 8 ISO programs that we specialize in that we get a lot of requests for. And those are like medical device. We have some in automotive. We do have food occasionally in the ISO standards. However, 9001 for quality management systems, 14001 for environmental management systems, and then 45001 for occupational health and safety. Those are the most common. The reason for that is because those are being requested by customers of our clients. So folks call up businesses, say, we need you to have this. So where you are only asked to do a quality management system or only asked to do a worker safety program, OHAS, or health and occupational health and safety, then you only need to do those. Oftentimes, businesses, especially in the European continent and sometimes in Asia, those businesses will say, hey, we want you to get certified in more than one standard at the same time. So that can be 3 times the work. Or if we have a competently put together program where we integrate it, we can slim this thing down into one program that covers all the requirements for all 3 programs. And that's really what we're going to be looking at today. So as I just mentioned, there are 5 main points of these combined programs that really have to be correct. And we're going to look at that. And through backing, as we look at those, our hope is to back into some of the essence of all of those ISO programs. So if you are already managing an ISO program, hopefully the discussion of objective settings, the discussion of non-conformance, root cause, and corrective actions, internal audits, management review, and outputs and improvements. There is a lot of applicable stuff, even in small ways, but we're going to look at what does it mean to combine those in a single program. So we're going to start with the setting of objectives. We're going to cover each one of these sections. And in the end, we're going to see what it looks like to assign responsibilities in an organization for folks to manage all three of those things, and what needs to be looked at. What are we reviewing, and what kind of data are we collecting to make sure that when you go through audit, you do so with total confidence. So at the bottom here, the most important message that when we're combining three programs into one, it doesn't have to be 3 times the work, but we do need to have 3 times the organization. So we really do need to set our structure correctly, even if we don't need to duplicate every action 3 times to get it correct. So let's talk quickly about a little bit, in a little more depth, what ISO 9001, ISO 14001, and ISO 45001 are. For the 9001 quality management systems, this is the most common ISO program, I think probably in the world, certainly the one that we are most commonly working with folks on. That is your business. And ISO 9001, the quality management system, applies to service providers and producers of things. So you can apply it to factories or businesses that are providing a service. And the organizational structure of that business has to meet the requirements of the 9001 standard. So every business that's going to get 9001, you need to download, you need to pay for and purchase the 9001 standard. You need to have folks in the organization, including top management, read and understand the requirements. And then all the program has to be built around those standards. Similarly, and in parallel, ISO 14001 for environmental management systems are addressing specifically the aspects of the business that pertain to doing the least harm to the environment or controlling the way the business functions to achieve an outcome that is of greatest benefit to the environment around that facility, and I guess in a more global context. So, and to be clear, if an example might be of a 14001 program that measuring water output for pollutants in water in the airways, whether we have steam or some kind of expressed chemicals in the air, measuring those, and with an attempt to either reduce them or mitigate some of the damage that can come from unwanted outputs in environmental pathways. And if, for example, we have water as a component of our quality management system. So if we're manufacturing steel, for example, and we may have water jackets in process, the management of water can apply to the quality management system where water is an input or it's a part of one of our processes. And it can also apply to the 14001 program if, after it has been used in our system, we're also trying to make sure that there aren't any lingering chemicals in that water. And we may end up putting programs into place to purify that water, remove, desalinate, or do some kind of process to it. If that happens, then water applies to both of those programs, and we're just measuring different aspects of it as part of these programs. In the 45001, our OHAS, or Occupational Health and Safety, this really applies to how workers are being kept safe and following protective measures to mitigate injury in a system. I will say we're going to quickly look at the combined organizational structure of all three of these. I will say that for 45001, there is one special component to it, which is that it is compelling non-management workers to be properly trained and committed in all aspects of the business so as to prevent injury and to get the best possible compliance with safety measures. In the 14001, the special piece of it is going to be the emergency preparedness system. So we have a special program. 9001 really gets into sort of how all operations functions. And so you have kind of a wide range of SOPs with desired outcomes for products and services. So to quickly break down the sections, and this is where when we're conceptualizing 9001, 14,001, and 45,001, we have 3 different books. They're somewhere between 100 and about 150 pages each, I think, maybe 100 to 150 each. So they're kind of long books, but when you get into the rules are actually written to mirror each other in terms of how they are organized. Again, there are these special distinctions that emergency preparedness is not in 9001, but it is in 14,001, and worker safety and compelling the participation of non-management workers is unique to 45,001. However, the way that all the rules are written, they're all structured the same. So when you have one book to the next, they kind of line up really nicely, which makes it easy. And that is part of the genius of ISO. And so there are like hundreds or thousands of potential ISO programs. They all start in the same place and have roughly the same basic structure. So with section 4 of the ISO code for 9001, 14,001, and 45,001, we have the context of the organization. That means different things for each one of those programs. What my quality management system is, the context of it is one thing. The environmental management is another part of it. It may be linked, but is somewhat separate focus on it. And then worker safety is obviously somewhat of a unique facet. They all may interact with each other, but the context is going to be a little different. For section 5, we have leadership. Now, if we have a large corporate structure, we could have different leadership applied to each program. I may have a worker safety department or safety management department. I may have a specific part of the business that addresses environmental management that is somewhat separate of quality management. In small or medium-sized businesses, leadership may just be the same people, and that's completely fine. As long as it is identified that way and documented properly, we can really have one leadership group covering all 3 of these programs. After that, in section 6, we have planning. The planning of the programs really is the setup. If anyone has familiar with our previous webinars, planning, I always say sections 4, 5, and 6 are the before. That's getting ready for the programs. 7 and 8 really are the operational functions of the program, and then 9 and 10 are kind of the after. So before, during, after. Mohammed has asked, can we kindly guide us with the sections meanings and where are 1 and 3? That 1 through 3. That's a great question, and I apologize. I could have done a better job of explaining the ISO codes. So when you download those books, and please, if you're going to get into ISO, please download those manuals. I'm really not allowed to share them. ISO is very protective of those books, and so we recommend folks go to the website and purchase them. The ISO codes, each one of them starts at section 1, and sections 1, 2, and 3 are normative. They are the explanations of what the ISO system is. They define the words that are important and set up how the audits function. So sections 1, 2, and 3 are not the rules for the code, and so we don't have to start at 1, 2, and 3. Section 4 is the first section of the rules, and it goes through section 10. So there are really 7 sections of the ISO code. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yep, I always count because 4 to 7 is weird. But sections 1 through 3 really are not rules for how to functionally make the programs work. So we start with 4. And so the meanings, the context of the organization, who are we, leadership, who is in charge, planning, how am I arranging workers for each program to make sure that I understand what each person's going to do within that program. And we're going to talk about setting objectives, but also risks and opportunities. So what are the things that could go wrong for quality? What are the things that could go wrong environmentally? And what are the things that can go wrong for worker safety? So each one of those things are considered. And then the opportunities, what are the things that we can do to improve or to get the best possible outcome for each of those? Section 7 is our support section, which includes resources, training, which we call in the ISO programs competency and awareness, what workers have to do to comply with this program, And then in addition to what they have to do they understand it, and are they aware and competent at those things? So for the 9001 part of the program, that applies to all of the quality of the either services or the products we make. For the 14,001, for the environmental aspects of what we're doing, if, for example, we are running tests on water or air coming out of the facility, do the workers understand what those tests are, how to properly collect those things? And if we have the machines to do it within the organization, do we know how to run those? If they have to be sent to a third-party lab, do the workers know who to send it to? For the 45,001, again, for the support, you start to get into very specialized things, because for quality and for environmental management programs, leadership or top management can kind of take responsibility for it. In the worker safety program 45,001, there's a real specific initiative to make sure that non-management employees fully understand it. So when we start to get into competency and awareness, you have to go above and beyond when it comes to the training to make sure that the non-management workers really understand the PPEs that they're supposed to wear, the protective equipment. They understand any kind of safety mechanisms in the facility or within the chain of operations. And they fully understand and are committed to letting people know when there's something dangerous going on. Section 8, which is the operations, that really gets into how things function. So in a quality management system, that's our SOPs. For the 14,001, the emergency management system is in section 8. And then the worker safety SOPs live there. And then lastly, we have performance evaluations, which are internal audits and management review. We're really going to focus on those. And then last is the improvements. How do we make it better each year? Each manual spells this out really, really carefully and with a lot of detail. So I have to recommend that if you need to know more, you have to go to those ISO manuals. I really didn't come here today to kind of teach about ISO. So with that said, the key elements, I'm sorry, I should say, I didn't come to teach the basics of all of these ISO programs. That would take hours and hours. We're really looking at where they fit together in these combined programs. So the key elements for combined programs, since we've just quickly looked at a brief overview of hey, of all of the sections that go on, and each one of them have to be considered as these programs are built out. But if I have a combined program, the absolute most important parts of getting it right for having all three of them at once, getting that organizational context dialed in for all three. That is one potential statement, one document, one slideshow. Who are we? Who are we for 9001? So what are we making? What is the product or service? How are we doing it to what our customers or clients are asking for? How are we managing our environmental processes? And what are the worker safety requirements? That is all one potential document that is critical to get that correct. For leadership. Now, documenting leadership is pretty easy. Usually that's just an org chart. It may be in the form of sort of a spreadsheet roster, or it can be a traditional graphically based org chart. That's pretty easy. But what is difficult in a combined program is to get those leaders in the room and really hammer out who is responsible for each part of this combined program. If it's just going to be 3 or 4 people running everything, if I have a plant manager, a VP plus QA, and maybe a maintenance person, and that's going to be our ISO team, and they're going to run all 3 programs, so be it. But usually this is complicated enough where we may need multiple people in various departments to be involved to get this right. And so hammering out who leadership is, getting that roster clear, and having those job descriptions identified to specific detail enough to run it, that's really crucial. Beyond that, getting those risks and opportunities, the change management and quality planning, getting that right is crucial. For support, where is all the proper information and the documentation? Where is that coming from? And how are we going to combine all of those things into managing all 3 programs simultaneously? We're going to get into some specifics as to what that documentation needs to look like as it pertains to objectives, internal auditing, and management review. For my training program, that is customized to each project, but we need to remember to line up what information we're going to be using for competency and awareness, compliance training, if you will. So each employee, we need to understand which part of the program they are involved in, one or all of them, and what kind of trainings they're going to need. And then after that, for the actual operations, we need to have the quality SOPs, the emergency management system for the environmental system. We need to have our OHAS, our environmental health and safety SOPs put into place. We need all of our controls, an understanding of what the external sources are to make that work. With all of that in place, we're going to have non-conformances. We're going to do an internal audit. We're going to have performance evaluations and improvements. So all of those things are the key elements that you have to maintain in these programs. That's a lot. To dive into some of the specifics, setting of objectives. Now, I'm going to tell you now that from my standpoint as a consultant that consistently works on ISO programs, in order for it to be correct, to have a good ISO program, whether it is a single program addressing one of these or combined, the setting of objectives is the single most important aspect of getting these programs correct. We have to do all of those key elements. There's a lot of work involved, but the setting of the objectives really defines what we are going to be looking at throughout the entire program. So we're going to look at some examples in a moment of what a good objective is. You're going to, many of you may be familiar with the idea of the KPI, a key performance indicator. We're going to look at how key performance indicators link with objectives. They can really be sort of synonymous. A KPI and an objective can kind of be one-to-one. An objective is, of course, what we're trying to achieve. A KPI, a key performance indicator, is whether the system works properly. So they are not exactly the same thing. I will say that all three ISO programs that we're looking at, and basically all ISO programs, use the language of objectives. But those objectives need to be measurable. They need to be timely. And we have to be looking at the results to determine if things are going correctly. So when we are setting objectives, we must have quality objectives, we must have environmental management objectives, and we must have worker safety objectives. You cannot have only objectives for one part of the program and not all three. That would be something that would probably lead to a non-conformance from an auditor during a stage 1 or stage 2 audit. Beyond that, the objectives there needs to be enough of them to be comprehensive that we are managing all three systems or some variation. If I just have 9,001 and 45,001, I should have an equal number of objectives for both of them to show that they are equally important. There may be more. It's possible that you need more for one or the other. If I have all three programs, I may have an amount of objectives in which one's slightly favored over the others. But for the most part, we should have multiple objectives for each part of the program. And these need to be trended, they need to be reviewed, and they need to be measurable. So the fact of the matter is that there needs to be incoming data that is managed by somebody in charge of it for these programs, and that should be combined. Whether we have a graph or chart that does it, or whether we just have a grid where these things are being measured, that is not something that is defined by the code, but we need to have something. So let's look at these objectives. Let's look at some examples. What you see here on this slide, on the far right, we've identified which part of the program that it would apply to. So we have, for example, on the top here, a lost time injury rate, LTIR reduction. So we want to reduce lost time. This is a very, very common objective for businesses, whether or not they're ISO certified. Any business that cares about worker safety often will qualify it as lost time, right? People cannot show up to work. We cannot get things started. We want to reduce those things. So what the statement is for the objective here is we want to reduce lost time workplace injuries to 3 or less per calendar year. Obviously, we would prefer 0, but if a business has dangerous tasks, if it is common that injuries occur, we want to try to get it down to 3 or less. That's going to be ISO 45001 related. If we're decreasing facility greenhouse gases, that is obviously an environmental issue. So that is going to be related to the 14001 program. Along with that, we have another objective here, the transitioning of the vehicles in the fleet to low emission vehicles, whether that's electric or hybrid. So we want to replace 25% of the internal combustion fleet into electric or hybrid by the end of next year. That's 14,001 related. And sorry, the above description is reducing electric consumption by 10% total for greenhouse gas emissions. So as you can see, for that first description, it is clearly dealing with worker safety. The next two for environmental issues. These last two are going to be quality objectives. So shipping things on time and first contact resolution for complaints. 9001 specializes in feedback from our customers and the delivery and the logistics of performing a service or a product, getting a product where it's supposed to go. And so those are going to be specific to our quality management system. As you can see with all of these together, we can lump them into one master objective list. It touches on the various aspects of our business. But each one is pointed in the direction of one of the 3 specific programs. Now, how many objectives should I have before we go to the next slide? I will tell you that I think that 5 here is not enough. I think these are really good examples, and it gets to the point of what a different objective looks like. I would be looking for somewhere between probably like 8 and 12 objectives. Obviously, if we have 3 programs, I would say, 9, 12, or 15 objectives in the groupings of 3. So I would have maybe 3 each, 4 each, or 5 each of the objectives applying to 9001, 14,001, or 45,001. Folks who we work with, I always use the thought process of when you're going through audit and auditors are asking for evidence, anything presented is either a conversation starter or a conversation ender. And we are always looking to end the conversation as quickly as possible. So when an auditor asks how many objectives we have, if we have 5 objectives total, that's probably going to lead to a bunch of questions. It's going to start a conversation. Do we think we have enough? Are these adequate? And you're going to get an auditor really peeling back through their assessments, asking a lot of questions. If we have 12 or 15 objectives and they are very well considered, that's going to be the end of the conversation, most likely, hopefully. The auditor is going to spend their time evaluating the results. However, they're probably not going to be questioning you as to whether or not you think you have enough objectives. So something to consider. In terms of a KPI chart, even though these were our objectives, the statement in the center are the objectives. Here we actually have the metrics, and we have an assessment if we are going to achieve those during the timeline of assessment. So for the lost time injury, we're saying that we want less than 3. We had 7 previously. We have 2 currently for 2026. So we are on track. If we only have 1 injury or no more injuries, we're going to have achieved our goal. If there are multiple injuries between now and the end of 2026, at the time of this webinar, it's June, we would not meet those objectives. We would need some kind of regrouping of leadership to have meetings to determine what went wrong, why we had more than 3, and how we can get that back down to lower than 3. For the electrical usage, we are also on track based on the reduction of what our target goal is. So we were at 1,200. We're trying to reduce it by 10%. So that's going to be 1,080 of the wattage. And so we're at 534. So we are on track. But now, if I were looking at this in June of 2026, as we are currently in, I would say, we really hopefully are looking at electrical usage going forward. And hopefully we're going to see a reduction of that as it gets maybe cooler later in the year. For fleet electrification, we had starting with 0, trying to get to 25%. We have only replaced enough vehicles to get to 8%. So we are at risk here. So we've mentioned that with objectives, risks and opportunities are the language we use. This, we got to speed up. We got to get more of those fleet replaced in order to reach our goal. Hopefully, in a real scenario like this, there's scheduled actions to purchase more vehicles, and we know what the schedule is going to look like. Last to the on-time delivery, we've achieved it. In this case, I suppose if it were the end of the year, we're saying we were at 91%. We wanted to get to 90. We need to have at least 90, so we did it. And the last one, customer complaints, were on track to meet our target goal of 85%. So that's what a KPI looks like as it relates to those objectives. And again, because we've picked from all 3 programs, one single list meets the requirements, and it doesn't require I have 3 separate managed programs, but rather that I have them combined into one. So now let's switch over to non-conformances, and then the follow-up root cause and corrective actions. Each program, as we looked at previously, has the requirements for within those 7 sections that we have non-conformance, root cause, and corrective actions documented. How a business chooses to document non-conformances and then does their investigation of why that non-conformance happened and what the corrective action is, that can be a generic process that applies to all 3. We need to have some kind of non-conformance events that have come up. We need to have a following root cause investigation that is performed timely. So when I find something that is non-conforming, if I went to go purchase a electrified vehicle and it didn't work, it was broken, or it had, I wanted to buy a full electric and the person purchasing it did not understand the tech specs of the vehicle and bought a hybrid by accident, that's going to be a non-conformance, and we're going to need to write it up, investigate why it happened, and what the corrective action is going to be. Lastly, with worker safety, usually any injury is probably going to be a non-conformance. However, that is not always the case. Sometimes accidents are not necessarily non-conforming to our system, but people failing to wear their PPE is a non-conformance. The failure to fully stock or to continue to replenish required protective equipment is most likely always going to be a non-conformance if it occurs. So those have to be written down. We need to investigate how that could have happened. Who didn't purchase the PPE on time? Was there a supplier failure to deliver and we didn't have a backup? And then what the corrective action is going to be. Now, much like the setting of objectives, how many non-conformances do I need is a frequent question that we get in all of our programs. And here, there is no specific number of non-conformances that we need to have in a combined program. However, if we have 3 books that we are managing to, we have 3 full programs with a very large range of things that need to be managed, a quality management system, environmental management system, and a worker safety system. The idea that there will not be things going wrong is, pretty much preposterous. There's going to be errors in those programs, and it is expected that we're going to be writing those down. I would expect to see non-conformances addressing each one of those programs presented each year. So I expect to see non-conformances for the quality management system. I expect to see non-conformances for the environmental program, and I expect to see non-conformances for the worker safety system, the OHA system. Now, since we have these objectives, any failure to meet these objectives is a non-conformance. So here we are on track for 3 of the 5 objectives. We have achieved the on-time delivery, so there was no non-conformance, but that at risk, that fleet electrification, if we do not meet our goals, that needs to be documented. We need to do a root cause as to why it happened, and again, a corrective action. So any of the objectives, and I've just told you, I think you should have like 9, 12, or 15 objectives. any failures in those would require this non-conformance. So that might be several non-conformances. Anyone who has watched previous videos from me, webinars, or our videos, knows my feeling is that folks need to be walking through and doing inspections of operations on a regular basis. I believe that a functioning QA, QC, or top management program for any ISO or any certification scheme should have somebody walking around seeing what's going on a daily basis. That is the gold standard. If we're doing that, the non-conformances there should be a lot of non-conformances. Anybody looking to see what's going on is going to find things that are not correct. That is human nature. And now we live in a technical age. So the technology is also going to have plenty of errors. There is no perfect systems. And in fact, quite the opposite. Every system we have is features things going wrong. And we are not judged in an ISO program for perfection. In fact, it's the opposite. If someone goes into an audit with a combined program and says, hey, we are perfect. Our quality management system has produced 0 failures. Environmentally, everything has gone exactly as we planned it. And worker safety, fantastic. We've had no injuries. Your auditor is probably now going to have a lot of questions, and they are not going to be necessarily very polite questions because they're probably going to assume that this is dishonest. Anybody who's ever done an internal audit or a third-party audit of a business can find errors usually within a few minutes. That's normal. We need to have them documented. We need these root cause investigations and corrective actions. You can have them together in a combined program. I would expect, again, to have at least one for each program and probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 to 15 non-conformances throughout a year at least if we're managing 3 programs. So moving on from non-conformances, I want to talk about this is really the most critical piece of a combined program. I know we said objectives are the most essential to get it right, because if those are not correct, the program is not going to function properly. To go along with that, internal auditing must be done correctly in an ISO program. This is what auditors are primarily focused on, is the internal audit and the management review. For each one of these programs, each of the 9001, 14001, and 45001 program requires an internal audit annually. So at least one internal audit for each program throughout the year. So when we're talking about the combining of the programs, that can mean I take the book or I take my quality program and internally audit it once. That might take several days or a week. I finish that and move to my 14001 program. That might take a week. Then I finish that and do the 45001 program. Well, in that scenario, I'm spending at least 3 weeks doing internal auditing. Because we have a combined program, that is not necessary. What is required is that I do an internal audit that covers all 3 programs every year. So from our standpoint at Kellerman Consulting, if someone has a combined program, I would immediately start with the premise that we are going to split the internal audit up into regular events throughout the year, because we have 3 systems that we are trying to control and internally audit. And it seems overwhelming to try to break that up into single internal audit events for each program. We should be combining that and then dicing it up. We recommend to do that either every quarter or every month. So now we're going to combine all of our systems, at least as far as what we are internally auditing. We can divide up the sections that we're going to look at. We looked at the 7 sections starting from 4 to 10, so we can divide it up by those programs. If we have specific sections of our system that we want to internally audit, those can be plugged into a schedule, and we can dice that up into 12 months or 4 quarters and do 25% of it per quarter or 1/12 of it per month, leading to a full internal audit of the entire program. If we are doing that and there is any part of the program that is consistently proving to have error when we internally audit it, we may want to specifically identify one part of the program that gets internally audited repeatedly. So if my company fails to purchase the PPE correctly on time, if we are running out regularly, we may want to internally audit the purchasing department more than once a month, right? More than 1 month of the year. We may want to internally audited every month or for 2 of the quarters so that we only have a small gap in time between internal audits as opposed to saying purchasing is going to be internally audited once a year and they're going to have 11 months to do whatever they do before I get back around to it. If they've already had a bunch of errors, that's not a good practice. So we need to define how and when we're going to internally audit. So who's going to be involved and what's the means that we're going to do it. And that should lead to a specific internal audit schedule. Now, internal audit schedules are generally required for internal audits. We need to say when we're going to do it. If we only do it annually, an internal audit schedule generally looks like, well, I'm going to wait until the right before my actual certification audit, and I'll just schedule my audit right before that. Maybe a month before, maybe 8 weeks before, if I want to be cautious. But if we're going to have a combined program, my suggestion is to get away from that, to get a good internal audit schedule put together and to define who's going to be doing it. So here I have a couple examples, and I've broken it up into monthly. So on the right side, we have the different sections of the program that we're going to be internally auditing. So we have our KPIs and objectives, our trend reports in January, and the VP of Ops, the purchasing manager, and the program lead are going to be responsible for that. Down below, we have different parts of the program that are going to be looked at the subsequent months. And we have different people within the organization that may have those responsibilities. Now, the program lead probably is going to be involved at least in overseeing the internal audits. They certainly can be involved in all of the internal audits by bringing other people into the process. We're going to be able to do really comprehensive process audits. So we're going to be able to investigate the various parts of the program. We need to be careful in an ISO program that the person completing the tasks is not the one internally auditing it. So the way I picked in this example who would be doing the internal audits would try to be folks that are not necessarily involved directly in that program. Now, if you look in February, I have preventive maintenance and repair, and I do have the maintenance manager involved. But if the lab manager and the program lead are leading the process audit and the maintenance manager is helping to direct where the information is, and we're interviewing some of the other maintenance folks as part of that process, and we're looking at the records for maintenance, then we'll have a nice clean internal audit that does not create a problem where we're internally auditing our own work. So we would set this up all year long, essentially to continue to have internal audits that are being done each month, trying to stick to it. If we schedule it monthly and we cannot get to one of the internal audit events each month, we might again have a non-conformance if we were supposed to do one in February and we didn't get to it. But if the corrective action is to do 2 of them in March and we get that done, we're going to be okay. That non-conformance, if it's a failure to get the internal audit done correctly, would apply to all 3 parts of the program simultaneously. But the correction or corrective action in this case might be retraining on the internal audit schedule, the correction of just getting 2 audits done the subsequent month. We would be okay on that. If we are able to internally audit the entirety of the combined program over the course of the year, cutting it up into months, we're going to have an incredibly strong program. And when we're getting ready to go through our audit, if we've done this, the auditor is going to be able to see that we have control over the entire program and that we have a comprehensive verification system through internal auditing. So again, here, the biggest takeaway for anybody still listening is get that internal audit schedule like comprehensively set up, really assign the responsibilities there, and you'll be doing yourself an enormous favor in a combined ISO program to getting to a successful outcome consistently year in and year out. To go along with the internal audits, we have our management review. And just like the internal audit, we are required to review all three of our programs at least annually. So each program is required to have a management review of all of the program and its functions on a yearly basis. And as with the internal audits, we could do 3 separate management reviews to cover one for each program, or we can combine one management review or multiple management reviews to cover all 3 at the same time. There is no restrictions on that. From my standpoint, this is where the time savings really occurs, is combining the internal audit, combining the management review, and getting the everything that can be combined: leadership, risks and opportunities, some of the quality tools that we might use for our program. Getting those combined where we can saves a lot of time and makes it efficient. When we do the management review in a comprehensively scheduled, structured, and complete way that covers all 3 of the programs at once, this is an incredible way to get a great ISO program and to do it and to feel that every year we're going to be able to present a very strong case to an auditor that our ISO program is correctly managed. So for a management review process, we are reviewing the inputs to the system. We're reviewing all of the processes, our objectives. We're making sure that the risks and opportunities are up to date. Any continuous improvement projects are being done correctly. Things like trainings, so our competency and awareness is up to date, that we're staying up with those. The resources that we're administering are sufficient to run the program, so on and so forth. So it really is the entire program. Now, if we've internally audited everything, we really just need to confirm through internal audit that those are functioning correctly. And management review can just look at the internal audit as well as the key objectives to say that the program is running. So my position, and if anyone's watched previous webinars that I put on, internal audits and management review go together. So one internal audit should equal one management review. Now that on an annual basis, that makes perfect sense. I do my internal audit in April. I do my management review either at the end of April or early May to find out what the results were, to confirm that the corrective actions have been fixed, to go over any of the issues that we've discovered that need to be addressed as part of management review. Since we've just talked about an internal audit schedule that might be quarterly or monthly, if we're doing it monthly, then we can have a management review every single month to follow the internal audit. Or I could say I'm going to do my management review quarterly and review 3 of the internal audits for each management review. That would be fine and acceptable. If we're going to do it that way, we're going to have the results for the quarter. So each of those monthly internal audits are going to be presented at the end of the quarter for that management review. That would be fine. We're still looking at the corrective actions, root cause, and the non-conformances that come from those internal audits. And management is going to sign off on making sure that they are correct. Here, leadership must be involved in those management reviews. We need to follow the basic premise that ISO has for them. So that is generally looking at inputs, processes, and outputs, confirming that we're getting the right results for those objectives. Again, that everything is up to date and that the internal audits were done correctly. So we have our internal audit schedule was followed, all of the scheduled areas were done correctly, and that the people involved were the correct people. So if we have those objectives that we talked about set right, if we have our internal auditing, a really good schedule, we have a good process, and everyone is committed to getting those internal audits done correctly, and I have regular management review that is done following those internal audits, this is the heart, the beating heart of a fully functioning and compliant combined program. All of the other aspects of the program are important and must be met. If these things are being done correctly, we're going to most likely pass our audits year in and year out. We're going to have most likely a very well-functioning organization that is achieving its quality objectives, its environmental objectives, and its worker safety objectives correctly. So we should have a really tightly and well-run business that's efficient and effective and achieves our outcomes in the way that we are hoping to. The last piece, the fifth element, as it were, that I mentioned, is going to be those outputs and improvements. So again, we've set our objectives, we have our non-conformances, our internal audits, and our management review. After all that is considered, and we are looking at what the end results are and the ways that we want to get better, improvements really are something that we have to have improvement projects. This is the most fungible piece. So I kept mentioning, and I always will mention that, hey, I need to have something for my quality management system for 9001. So I need to have objectives for that, non-conformances for that, internal auditing against that program and management review. Same for the 14,001 and the 45,001. For my continuous improvements, if I'm building a new garage to store my fleet, and it is also a safer place for my workers to perform repair and management on the electrical fleet that I have. Better charging stations, safer for folks plugging things in, better signage, better guardrails or whatever in that garage. That continuous improvement project may apply to 2 programs at once. And we may be able to prove that building that garage also improves the quality of what we're doing in our business. And in that case, one continuous improvement project may meet all of those requirements for all 3 programs. So here, depending on the nature of a continuous improvement project, we might have 1, 2, or 3 projects that cover everything, but we need to have a list of continuous improvements. Those can be based on non-conformances, so we can fix things that were broken as part of improvement projects, or we can reach beyond what we're doing to try to just make better efficiencies, get better outcomes, even in the absence of non-conformances. So we can have either fixing things that are broken or making things better that work properly. But we need to have a list of those improvements, and we need to evaluate which of the programs or all of them, if they do, what is applicable. So what are we applying it to? The same with the outputs. If we have quality outputs, the environmental outputs, and the worker safety outputs, those evaluations of those things, that's part of management review. But as a capstone to our reports to top management, if we are saying that we have achieved our aims, that we've done all those programs correctly, and at the end, we have a good outcome, as well as a list of improvements that we're working on, we really have completed an ISO program for all 3 of those things combined. Once we get our certifications for all 3, hopefully they are going to the folks that are asking for it, or if it's just internally driven, we have a sense that we have achieved as a business ourselves, and we should be in a great place going forward as a business. So as we get to the end of the hour, just to review quickly, a combined program is a carefully arranged program with very good, thoughtful structure, scheduling, and responsibilities are divided up amongst the program, amongst the people involved in the programs in a way that they fully understand, and that allows us to get everything done. The objectives are really strong. We have really good evaluations and trending analysis for our objectives that cover all 3 programs. We have a really strong internal audit schedule along with a corresponding really strong management review schedule. They're designed, they're sensible, folks know what they're doing and when. And they are always, the programs are effective and driven by really good record keeping. Mohammed said this webinar on personal skill improvement and how they can enhance international levels and how they can merge with an FSSC program. Okay. So these are all international. If you are trying to merge an ISO program with FSSC 22000, that is a GFSI program. So that is based on ISO 22000, which we did not specifically talk about ISO 22000. However, the requirements that we talked about in all 3 of these, if you are specifically running a food business to ISO 22000 and you have a GFSI requirement, which is that FSSC 22000, That means that you would be combining 9001 with the 22,000 and the ISO 22000, the technical specification manual that goes with it, and then the additional FSSC requirements. So you are still doing this same process, but you would have some additional programs for food facilities. And that would be too detailed for us to be looking at in the moment. What I will say, Mohammed, if you have questions about it, this is our contact information. You can call into our business, and we do not charge for a basic explanation of that would be specific to food. For you folks that are not running food businesses, if you have other ISO programs, you can slot those in the same manner that we are discussing here. The principles that we've discussed still hold. And again, with those strong objectives, whether it be for an FSSC program, food-based, if you had an ISO 13485, a medical device program, and they are medical device focused, we still need to have those objectives. You still need to have all of those operational programs that are internally audited, managed, that then have a functional management review. We have our non-conformances that go along with that. To take it into real quick, back to Mohammed, for a FSSC 22000 program, if you have critical control points or operational prerequisite programs that apply specifically to food, so if I have cooking or refrigeration requirements, those are going to be part of our objectives, and those are going to be reviewed if they're critical as part of every internal audit and as part of every management review. But otherwise, still fits into the framework we've discussed. We're ending on our improvements and outputs, and we would have a really good program. We have a few minutes left. If anyone has any other questions, things they would like to raise before we end this webinar, you have an opportunity to do so now. Otherwise, as I've mentioned, this was not a commercial for our business, and really don't try to push consulting services. However, if folks do have questions, we really do love to talk to folks and hear from you. We provide an opportunity to anyone who calls us to get free information if they want in an opening call with questions. If we can be of service, we obviously can provide those if folks need it. So that is a part of the service we offer. However, I really hope that this webinar has provided some basic, thoughtful information that is helpful to you in a combined ISO program. And if you need anything else, please ask now or give us a call.